Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Asian stocks gaining after optimism about Fed interest rate cuts drives U.S. shares near record highs. French Prime Minister Francois Bayrou to resign after losing a confidence motion. President Emmanuel Macron is running out of obvious candidates as he seeks a fifth premier in less than 2 years. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is asking Gaza City residents to leave as the U.S. looks to advance a new ceasefire proposal. Well, it's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. The major theme for markets is U.S. investors continue to price in a faster rate easing cycle. We've got about 3 rate cuts priced in by the end of this year, about 150 cumulative by the end of 2026. Attention is turning to the BLS jobs revisions data to watch out for today. The expectation is we are going to get a downward revision of about 700,000. So huge downward revision expected to come later today, and obviously speak to some of the weakness in the labor market. And we also have CPI figures to watch out for on Thursday as well. So lots of milestones to get through still in the U.S. And speaking of that, S&P futures leaning towards the green, very close once again to those all-time record highs. So very close to record as we speak about prospective easing out of the Fed. 10-year yields, take a look at where we are. 4.05. It wasn't that long ago, i.e. it was only the beginning of last week that we were talking about how high yields were moving. We had a bit of a fallout in global fixed income, that fixed income rout after Labor Day. Well, we've reversed pretty much all of it and are moving even lower. 10-year yields about to break through 4% on the downside. So risk, we're seeing risk on in equities, but money pouring into fixed income. Very interesting observation there. USD continues to slip. That remains one of the themes. We're down about at 0.8% in the last 2 sessions. So more weakness on the dollar. And then gold once again at record highs. Money keeps going in to gold. We are up 0.3%. 3,650 is where we're at. But let's flip over. This is an interesting chart observation from our colleague in Hong Kong, Anthony Stevens. Very interesting to note that even though France, we talk about political developments there. Yesterday, the government, as expected, failed with the confidence vote. And now President Macron has to choose a new prime minister. And despite all of that, European assets have been taking all of these French politics in their stride. Take a look at the euro. 117.60 is where we're at. Many analysts are saying that we could go all the way up to 120, given we're close to the end or at the end of the ECB easing cycle. Compare that to the US, which are about to embark on it. So euro taking all of the French politics in their stride. And then take a look at the divergence between the Euro Stoxx 50 versus the performance of the CAC 40, which obviously has been held back by some of these political developments. So interesting to note. And we will be speaking more about French developments in the show. Okay, let's push on and check in also on how markets in Asia are faring. Yvonne Mann is in Hong Kong. Yvonne, what are you watching today?
Yeah, Jumani, you mentioned risk on. We're certainly seeing that here in the region today amidst those Fed rate cut bets. Of course, and that dollar weakness that is really kind of fueling a lot of the momentum and breadth around some of these Asia equity markets. You talk about Japan. We briefly touched 44,000 on the Nikkei 225. That certainly is a key milestone there. And we're watching, of course, Taiwan ahead of some of these. Apple about to unveil its latest iPhone, 8 shares as well. Also seeing some breakouts here in these markets. And the tech space certainly has been on fire once again. On the flip side of this, though, we do talk about Indonesia, that exit of the Finance Minister Idrawati there. Certainly there's a lot of focus on, can the government continue with this fiscal restraint without her, right? That's where the concern is. She was a staunch defender of the debt profile of Indonesia. So that's what is under pressure. So is the currency, right? You're seeing the rupiah weakening some 1%. The central bank has said that they are intervening to maintain that stability in the rupiah. So that is one to watch in Southeast Asia. In terms of movers, we talked about Alibaba and the rest, right? Alibaba is one of the key sort of market darlings right now. It really moved from being, the big drag when it came to food delivery and the like to now a very favorable AI play in China. We're at 141 levels. We're flirting with 4-year highs for this stock. That dates it back to crackdown and pre-fines at that time back in 2021. So certainly it's a remarkable sort of comeback story for Alibaba itself. Baidu has been single-handedly also lifting a lot of the tech space as well.
Yeah, what a comeback story for Alibaba indeed. Yvonne Man in Hong Kong. All right, let's go back to that top European story from yesterday. The French President Emmanuel Macron is set to appoint a new Prime Minister soon to tackle the country's debt problems after Francois Bayrou's resignation. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook reports from the National Assembly in Paris.
As the session concludes here at the National Assembly in Paris, so too concludes the fourth French government in the last 2 years, underlining the fragmented politics of France and the difficulty of the next prime minister to try to pass a budget for 2026, who will be appointed in the coming days by President Emmanuel Macron. In his opening remarks, Prime Minister Francois Bayrou told lawmakers who were voting on his government today that they could topple the government, but they could not ignore reality. And that reality is a France that has not had a balanced budget in 51 years, a debt-to-GDP ratio which has reached 115%, and a deficit-to-GDP ratio which is the third worst in all of the European Union. It is a downfall that the markets have taken in relative stride, an event that was more or less priced in since the no-confidence vote was called, but it underlines yet another European government struggling with fragmented politics and an inability to pass a budget. We've seen similar stories across Germany, Spain, the United Kingdom, as well as the Netherlands. And it is coming at a time for the European Union struggling with competitiveness, with a rising China and a more hostile United States in its ambition to try to remain a global power.
That was Bloomberg's Oliver Crook reporting from the National Assembly in Paris. And we're going to talk about the French developments shortly with our guest. But I just want to bring you some breaking news from Thailand. We've been talking about some of the political developments, not just in Indonesia, but obviously in Thailand as well the last few days. A Thai court has now said that the former prime minister is being ordered to serve 1 year in jail and that his time in hospital did not meet the jail terms. And that his jail term was not properly enforced because he was actually spending it in hospital, and therefore he has now been ordered by the courts to serve 1 year in jail. His transfer out of prison is deemed to be unlawful. So major development there. And of course, this is as it pertains to the former Thai prime minister, seen as a key power broker when it comes to internal politics. And he himself was seen emerging from a private jet terminal at the airport on Monday afternoon, coming from Dubai. So this is the latest, and the jail term will be 1 year, according to Thai courts. So that is the latest over there. All right, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon believes there's no need for the Fed to rapidly cut interest rates, diverging from the Trump administration's pressure on the central bank to ease monetary policy.
This doesn't feel to me like the policy rate is extraordinarily restrictive at the moment when you look at risk appetite. And so, risk appetite is definitely, out on what I'd say is the more exuberant end of the spectrum.
Okay, let's get the market outlook with Amar Bashir, head of fixed income at Wealthbrix Capital Partners. Okay, you know what? I started the show talking about the global fixed income route a week ago. Things have completely reversed in the U.S., and now we're talking about 10-year yields potentially breaking 4% to the downside. That, to me, that speaks of perhaps bad positioning, that people were positioned for rates to continue moving higher. Hasn't transpired. Why the turnaround?
First of all, thank you for having me on the show, Jomana. I think if you look at last week, we opened with a deluge of corporate issuance, and that with the tariff announcement, the ruling that the lower court ruled President Trump's tariffs illegal, that weighed as well on potentially reduced revenues from tariffs. But it really is all about the data. Last week we saw an incredible amount of U.S. data, all telling a very similar story, that the labor market is weakening and weakening fast. And so that has opened the path to rate cuts. We expect the first rate cut next week of 25 basis points.
Not 50?
I don't think 50. I think there's an outside chance of it. Last year we saw them start with 50 basis points. This year we're starting with a very difficult, more difficult inflation trajectory. So I think they will be cautious.
Slightly stickier on the inflation side.
Absolutely.
So interesting to hear Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon say that he doesn't think rates are too restrictive here. Do you think the market is getting ahead of itself in terms of expecting 150 basis points cumulative rate cuts by end of 26?
So I think the difference...
Takes the terminal of about 2.8.
Correct, exactly. I think, so neutral rates are estimated to be about 3%. So prior to last week, we had been pricing a rate cutting path to bring rates down to neutral. Last week, we are now officially pricing in a rate-cutting path to an accommodative policy stance. Looking at the data, looking at what we've seen from the payroll revisions and what we've seen last week, I think that is appropriate. And if you think about the composition of the Fed and what that might look like over the next year, I think there's good asymmetry to being long, even at 280 terminal.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? The other big theme that came up last week is investors / the bond vigilantes, those guys that we tend to talk about, guys and girls that we tend to talk about. They're picking on nations that don't seem to have a credible fiscal consolidation path. And here I'm talking about Japan long end, UK long end, French yields, obviously with everything that's going on there. But the U.S. actually seems to be spared from that now with the big rally back that we've seen in 10-year U.S. Treasuries. How much of a theme do you think this is going to continue to be for those markets outside of the U.S., do you think?
I think it will remain a very relevant theme in the markets. It remains to be a big concern. That's why we own, we're constructive on fixed income, but we like to own the 5 to 10-year part of the curve. We generally...
even in the U.S.?
Even in the U.S., yes. We've been positioned in steepeners really all year long, and we continue to like them. We find it better to just shy away from the long end, just given the risks. That being said, you look at what the price action over the last few sessions, you've seen a big flattening back in the long end of the U.S. We see these as opportunities to add to the position. Yeah.
What about French bond spreads? Again, I mean, as expected, the government has fallen. Macron has to appoint another PM. But who knows? I mean, these, the fiscal consolidation issues, it's not easy. The parliament is so fragmented there.
Absolutely.
People are saying that he's just kicking the can down the road. What does that do to French spreads to Germany? We're sitting around 80.
Sure. So I think yesterday was widely expected, as you mentioned. The big tail risks were President Macron calling snap elections or resigning himself. Those tail risks did not materialize. And so we actually saw a small tightening in French spreads yesterday, about 2 basis points. We've been neutral. We think that the levels at this moment price in pretty fairly the downgrade risk, the fiscal risks. But as you said, it's a matter of kicking the can down the road. There's just no political will across this fractured parliament to tackle the budget deficit. And so what comes next is probably another short administration. And so for now, there's near-term relief, but long-term, it's still a concern.
Yeah, okay, fair point. I saw in your notes that you have also been long EM assets as well. 2 of them stand out to me, Brazil and Indonesia. I want to ask you about Indonesia because there has been some news overnight. My colleague Yvonne Mann was just walking us through it. You're seeing an impact in equities because of the replacement of the finance minister. What does that do to your view of the bonds, and how do you see things politically playing out?
Sure. So, it is a unwelcome development, as you can see from price action this morning. Sri Mulyani was a very well-respected finance minister. She's served at the finance ministry for 14 out of 20 years, served 3 presidents. So it is a concern. That being said, we think Purbaya, her replacement, while not very well known, we think is credible. He has a long career in the private sector. He's a tenured economist. And importantly, he's not a close ally of President Prabowo. So this isn't somebody who's going to just rubber stamp his policies. He's a market guy, and he's aware of the impacts that fiscal policies can have. That being said, it's worth close monitoring. We stay long, and for now we hold our position.
You hold your fixed income longs. Really good to chat to you, Amar. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I took you for a trip around the world in fixed income there. Amar Bashir, head of fixed income at Wealthbrix Capital Partners. Well, coming up, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is asking Gaza City residents to leave as the U.S. looks to advance a new ceasefire proposal. We are live from Jerusalem with the latest next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told residents of Gaza City to evacuate, saying troops were being assembled to enter the Palestinian territory's main urban center. In a video statement, Netanyahu said the Israeli military has brought down what he described as 50 terror towers, saying this is only the opening stage of the intensified ground maneuver in Gaza City. Meanwhile, Israeli police and medics say 6 people were killed and 13 wounded when a gunman opened fire at a bus stop in Jerusalem. Let's go to Jerusalem now. and speak to Bloomberg's Dan Williams. Let's just start with the first part of the introduction, which is the intensified assault on Gaza City. It's very clear that Israel have been ramping up their efforts, taking down some of these high-rise buildings in the last couple of days, Dan. But at the same time, the U.S. is really trying to get a ceasefire proposal across the line, putting pressure both on Israel and on Hamas to accept. So just bring us up to speed on what we know.
Indeed, there's no shortage of ultimatums in this situation. That appears to be by design. It's worth remembering that this Gaza City operation, an operation that the Netanyahu government says is what's required to finish the war, topple Hamas, achieve victory, as Israel would define it, was approved by the Israeli Security Cabinet something like a month ago. And as of now, Israeli troops have been operating at the periphery of Gaza City. There have been airstrikes, as you noted, the toppling of dozens of buildings after residents were evacuated, buildings alleged by Israel to have housed Hamas surveillance teams and the like. But it's clear the Israelis are in no rush to send in troops and tanks. This is not just because of the risk to their forces, the risk to whatever hostages Hamas may have inside Gaza City. It's also because of the risk to Palestinian civilians. There are believed to be as many as 900,000 still in Gaza City, not having fully heeded Israeli calls to leave, to evacuate, to displaced persons camps elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. So what you have is an ultimatum from the Prime Minister Netanyahu telling them to leave now. Those were his words. And in parallel, the US President Trump saying he had a final offer for Hamas, what he would describe or what the administration might describe as a ceasefire. But from what little we know of that offer, it would essentially be a consensual capitulation by Hamas, a surrender of all those 48 hostages at the outset, potentially albeit in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and down the line a disarming and dismantling of Hamas as a governing force. So while consensual, it would still meet Israel's requirements for an end of the war.
Yeah. I mean, hostilities continue in the backdrop, as you say. But let's also speak about the attack at the Jerusalem bus stop yesterday. According to the latest reports, 6 people were killed, 13 wounded. What do we know about what happened?
This was a daylight attack at a very busy junction in North Jerusalem. 2 gunmen, Palestinians from nearby, the area of Ramallah in the West Bank, boarded a bus or fired from the outside. At least one was using an improvised submachine gun, killing 6 civilians, 5 of them men, 1 woman, 2 of the men rabbis, as it happens, and wounding a number of people there. It really was a packed station. 2 first responders, one an off-duty soldier, another an armed civilian, killed those gunmen. Now, the Israelis are responding or saying they'll respond with great force. It's hard to know what else they could do. They've already blanketed the West Bank with troops. And Netanyahu noting or saying that this was apparently an attack that managed to get through after what he said were hundreds that were foiled by Israeli security forces. But clearly, friction violence remain in the West Bank, the other Palestinian territory, though much of the world's focus and Israel's focus and Palestinian focus is on what's going on in the Gaza Strip, or a month away from the 2nd anniversary of that war.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Thank you so much. Turkish riot police clashed with protesters in Istanbul on Monday. That's as a court-appointed trustee tried to take over the local headquarters of the country's main opposition party. Hundreds of protesters defied a 3-day ban on demonstrations imposed in 6 districts of the city. And tensions peaked as police used tear gas to disperse the crowd gathering outside the party's provincial headquarters. And coming up, Ethiopia's mega dam is finally online and it's riling up its neighbors. Details next. This is Bloomberg. Ethiopia is set to inaugurate Africa's biggest hydroelectric dam. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will power homes and industries across East Africa, but is sparking tensions with Egypt and Sudan over the flow of the River Nile. For more, our chief Africa correspondent Jennifer Zabazaja joins us from Johannesburg. I mean, Jennifer, this has been 14 years in the making, finally being inaugurated. Talk to us about the significance of this dam, perhaps before we talk about some of the controversies surrounding it.
Exactly, Jumana. Today is really the culmination of a years-long push, as you were just alluding to there. 14 years of delays. There's been disputes, even potentially war threats, and reportedly even deaths. But Ethiopia is officially going to be inaugurating this $4 billion hydropower dam, set to be the biggest hydropower plant on the continent, and also one of the biggest in the world. Now, the significance of it is what you had just pointed out there. They are hoping, the ambitions of this project is to hopefully generate power for Africa's second most populous nation that can help, of course, electrify a number of Ethiopians that do not have power. But also, they're hoping to become a major player in the hydropower export industry, not just regionally, but hopefully globally. And we've actually heard from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who suggests it could generate $1 billion a year and also help the country with foreign currency inflows. And a lot of this was really how the country was able to leverage the Ethiopians, right? This has been fully funded by Ethiopians. There were no international funders that were brought into the mix. They were able to get donations and also cash bonds that people were able to buy. And so for many people, this is a rare opportunity of unity for Ethiopians, especially if we take a look at 2026 being a year where they're going to have an election. But of course, as you pointed out there's quite a lot of controversy around this dam.
Okay, let's talk about that, because neighboring countries, Egypt and Sudan, are not happy at all. And I believe they put out a statement saying that the dam's construction actually violated international law. Why so much controversy, Jen?
Right. And this has been an opposition from Egypt and Sudan for years. This is not the first time that we have heard their opposition. There have been many times, though, over the past 14 years of construction that they've tried to get all of these neighboring countries on board to agree with the constructs of this dam. But that has not been able to elicit any sort of agreement. And really, if we take a look at it from the perspective of Egypt, and this map is perfect to show it, Egypt, 80% of Egypt's water needs are met by the Nile. And so the Nile River, of course, is integral to this part of the world, and also really globally if you take a look at it constructively. But also there's concern that some of these downstream players, as you can see there, Egypt and Sudan, potentially could have their own water needs affected if we do in fact see Ethiopia restricting some water downstream. And so as you were pointing out there, they are still opposed to it. So the question is, are there still going to be some more statements that are put out there, and internationally will we hear more?
We'll keep a close eye. Jennifer Zabazaja, our chief Africa correspondent in Johannesburg. Well, coming up, we're going to be talking about France and what happens next as President Macron is on the look for a new premier. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Asian stocks gaining after optimism about Fed interest rate cuts drives U.S. shares near record highs. French Prime Minister Francois Bayrou to resign after losing a confidence motion. President Emmanuel Macron is running out of obvious candidates as he seeks a fifth premier in less than 2 years. And we speak to the CFO of Du, Kais Ben Hamida, as the UAE telecom operator's secondary public offering sells out. It's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. Well, investors betting on more and more rate cuts, and so that's been driving equity markets higher, even global equity markets. So that's been the theme the last 24 hours. S&P close to all-time record highs once again. Futures leaning towards the green today, up 10 basis points through 6,500. 10-year yields, though, we continue to march lower. So a bit of a reversal from the narrative that we were speaking about at the beginning of the week last week, where those global yields were trending higher. Not the case anymore in the U.S. Ever since NFP, we've just been marching lower and lower. So a lot of attention will be paid to the cumulative job revisions today, and then the CPI print that's coming up on Thursday as well. Both key milestones to get through this week. USD continues to slip, 2 days on the back foot, down 0.7%. And then gold, once again, through a record high. We are sitting at 3,650. And remember, last week, we spoke to the global head of commodities at Citi, and they said that their target was 3,600. 600. That was on Friday. We've already broken through that. So gold just keeps shining, I should say. All right, let's switch over and talk a little bit about one chart that caught my attention from our colleague Anthony Stevens. And he was just pointing out that even though there has been a lot of domestic political turmoil in France, so far what you are seeing is a decoupling versus broader European assets. So your Stoxx 50 has managed to dissociate somewhat from the price action in the CAC 40. And then take a look at the currency, euro, completely brushing off some of those concerns, back up at 117.70, almost close to 120 for the euro currency. So yes, you do have a lot of political internal developments in France, but so far no signs of that disrupting broader Eurozone. All right, let's check in also on how markets in Asia are faring. Yvonne Mann is in Hong Kong. And Yvonne, I guess even Asian markets are cheering on the expected Fed easing cycle here.
Yeah, that dollar weakness is certainly underpinning a lot of the tailwinds that we're seeing in Asia, Jumana, as you mentioned, right? You know, as a time when the market is at all-time highs or around that in the S&P, when you're talking about rotating to maybe small caps in the U.S., for example, whether this rally can broaden, CLSA, we had a guest on this morning say, why not rotate to what you're seeing in Asia, whereas basically you're seeing the breadth and you're seeing the momentum, particularly when it comes to Japan, where we briefly hit 44,000 for that benchmark as well. 8 shares continue to see that breakout in stocks, and it's really the tech space that's leading that here right now. Jakarta is heading the opposite direction. Of course, we talk about fiscal discipline. That might be a big question mark after the exit of the finance minister there. That's why shares as well as the rupiah are seeing substantial pressure here this morning. But Chinese tech is still the standout here, and Alibaba certainly is front and center because it really became the #1 sort of pick among investors here, whether it's the AI play that really kind of changed the narrative after that earnings report last week. We're hitting 141, 4-year highs for that stock. That brings us back to kind of the glory days before, of course, the fines and that government crackdown on the private sector just 4 years ago, back in 2021. So certainly it's an amazing sort of turnaround for the stock as well. Baidu has certainly been a favorite among investors as well. And you still see some punchy gains with Tencent and JD today. Jumana.
Yvonne, thank you so much. Yvonne Mann in Hong Kong. Now, the 10-year French OAT to German bond yield spread has slid lower after the widely expected defeat of Prime Minister Francois Bayrou in a confidence vote. French President Emmanuel Macron will appoint a new premier in the coming days once he accepts Bayrou's formal resignation today. His successor will need to assemble a government and pass a budget in a splintered National Assembly, a task that's toppled the last 2 prime ministers. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Caroline Conan outside the National Assembly in Paris. Well, Caroline, we had been anticipating this government to fall. That is indeed the case. Bayrou is stepping down. Now President Macron has the task of picking the 5th, number 5, the 5th premier in the last 2 years. Who could succeed Bayrou here?
That's right. We're going to see a 5th prime minister in less than 2 years. What was a surprise was actually the magnitude of the votes against Francois Bayrou. 364 against him, only 194 in favor, meaning that even people within his own camp actually voted against the confidence in the prime minister. As you mentioned, the Élysée Palace published a statement last night saying they're going to name a prime minister quite quickly. Macron should choose a new prime minister within days. He's probably going to wait until after tomorrow, September 10, which is a day where the far left has called to block the country, to block everything, to kind of see exactly what kind of social anger we're talking about here. Now, Jumana, I don't want to do too much name dropping here, but obviously we're back trying to find a new name for this prime minister. Will he go this time for the technocratic route? Some are even mentioning, again, François Villeroy de Galhau, the Bank of France governor. And of course, the socialists, they want the job. They think it's their time. The socialist premier secretary, Olivier Faure, was on TF1, the 8 o'clock news last night, saying, we are ready. Macron should give us a chance. But that also means losing the moderate right wing, at least some of them. Bruno Retailleau, the current interim minister, was also on TV last night saying this new government, if it's a socialist government, is going to be without me. Meanwhile, Gabriel Attal, the head of Macron's camp here at the National Assembly, the Renaissance Party, in his speech yesterday before the confidence vote, was trying to call all the MPs to try and work together to have some sort of negotiator to pass this next budget. But a coalition government would be a mini revolution in France. This is not exactly in the spirit of French politics.
Yeah, so interesting, but they may have no choice given the fragmented backdrop. The one thing that also caught my attention with Bayrou is he didn't go down quietly. He said France is quite literally drowning in a tide of debt. So the job for the next government is a huge one when you think of the amount of fiscal consolidation that has to be undertaken. Who might be the person who could undertake this job?
Yeah, and in fact, it might really well depend on the social anger we're going to see over the next few days. We got this national day of blocking the country tomorrow, and then you got a more structured strike on September 18, where a lot of unions with trains, planes, schools have called for the country to shut down. So Macron may think about this. Naming a socialist government, perhaps, will it calm the social anger? Because, of course, in this socialist budget that they presented last week, they were offering, for example, to tax the rich or to boost the lowest salaries by lowering social charges. But in fact, as you were mentioning, Francois Bayrou criticized this idea of taxing the rich in his speech yesterday, saying they are like, talking about Bernard Arnault, for example, the LVMH CEO, saying they are like voodoo dolls in which you stick needles into them. So clearly it's really hard to imagine how this camp and the socialist camp, with a budget that's really watered down, are going to get along and try and really resolve the debt issue and put France on the path for sustainable public finances again.
Yeah, all big questions that the president has to grapple with in the coming days. Bloomberg's Caroline Conat, thank you so much for your reporting. Now, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has condemned the use of tariffs as a form of blackmail. This comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping warns that trade wars are disrupting the global economy.
Economic globalization is an irresistible trend of history. Countries cannot thrive without an international environment of open cooperation, and no country can afford to retreat to self-imposed isolation.
Bloomberg's China economy and government editor Alan Wong joins us for more. So quite simply, we did a preview of this upcoming virtual summit yesterday. What actually did these BRICS leaders talk about?
Yeah, of course. Their message is one of a unified opposition to tariffs and what they consider as a unilateral approach to global trade. They vow to uphold multilateralism and also the global trade system without naming any countries or U.S. President Trump. But we all know that's what they wanted to talk about. And there's one thing that these countries in the BRICS grouping has in common. You have Brazil, you have Russia, India, China, and also South Africa. Many of those countries, they face really steep tariffs from the Trump administration, with India facing, for example, 50%, and then China also facing somewhat in the same ballpark in terms of the average weighted tariff rate, and with a trade truce in place preventing that rate from going much higher. So they all came together last night and to talk about how tariffs are back for fat for the global economy without naming Trump, and they wanted to put up a united front against these tariff measures.
Yeah, and notable that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was not attending in person. He sent a representative. What does that tell you about some of the work that's going on behind the scenes with these BRICS nations, and perhaps India being a little cautious not to ruffle President Trump's feathers too much?
That is interesting indeed, because we just saw last week that Modi joined Xi and also Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, China, where they showed and literally held hands at one point. So India was also notably missing from the parade that Beijing put on shortly after. And this time, Prime Minister Modi himself was not present at the BRICS virtual meeting. And this just tells us that while India might be working its ties with China and other non-US countries, it is not exactly casting its lot with any one side. And like many countries, they're hedging their bets and building relations with different countries. And in India's case, I think the Indian government is at the same time also engaging with the Trump administration to try to get favorable tariff rates and other ways to benefit the country.
Yeah, Bloomberg's China correspondent, thank you so much. Economy and Government Editor Alan Wong, thank you. Now, coming up, fully subscribed, we speak to the CFO of Do as a secondary share sale sells out. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Bersace in Dubai. Abu Dhabi's Mubadala is offloading some of its stake in telecom operator Do in a secondary share sale. The offering is already fully subscribed amid high demand and could draw as much as $920 million. The Sovereign Wealth Fund owns roughly 10% and is putting up a stake of 7.55%, or 342 million shares priced between 9 and 9.9 dirhams each. The sale will increase the amount of shares available for public trading and help diversify its investor base and improve liquidity. Now, Do stock has slipped following the news, but remains 28% up year to date. For more, joining us now is Kais Ben Hamida, CFO of Do. Really good to have you with us on the show. Talk to us about the share sale, the fact that Mubadala are selling down quite a substantial stake. What does this mean for the future of the company that one of your anchor investors is selling down such a big stake?
Good morning, Jumana. Thank you for inviting me. I think, first of all, this is a first fully marketed offer transaction in the UAE, and it's a landmark for the capital market transactions.
Yeah.
It's as you highlighted, it's a public offer of existing shares of one of our anchor shareholders through an organized process that is very close to an IPO process. And I think what is important for us as a company is that this is a transaction that increases the free float.
Yeah.
Diversify the shareholder base and improving the profile of the company, in particular on the international scene. Improve the liquidity, which was sometimes a hurdle in the past for many investors to get into the stock, and paves the way for the company to get into indexes, which is extremely beneficial to the existing shareholders and the future shareholders that are going to join the company.
Yeah, we've had similar conversations with others doing secondary shares as well, but share sales as well. This is a fully marketed secondary offering. Why did you choose this structure?
I think this checked structure was the best, taking into account the size of the transaction and the profile of the company, and it was the best in order to ensure both the liquidity for our anchor investor, as you highlighted, and the improvement of the profile of the company going forward.
Yeah. In terms of the buyer base, can you give us indication of what percentage will be institutional versus retail? I know you've also been marketing to retail as well.
Absolutely. We have elected to include a retail tranche to make the retail investors benefiting from the story of Do going forward. We sized it at 5%, while the institution is at 95%. We believe that this level is a very good starting point for a transaction, for a new transaction to the market, to which the retail investors are not used to. And it remains as well a reasonable size. We're talking about 170 million dirham for the retail component.
Is there interest from the international community?
Excellent. Excellent feedback from the international community, excellent feedback from the local community as well. So we're having both high traction coming from international investors and from local investors.
So I want to turn to the business, because I know that Do are going to be heavily investing in data centers with some partnerships that you have coming up. But we know that the capex spending and the requirements on those data centers are huge, enormous. Tax on, not tax, but spending ask on the business. What does that do to your cash flow and your ability to pay out dividends to some of these new investors that are coming in?
Yeah, first, you're absolutely right. We're extremely interested in the data center sector. This has been the case even before the AI became a trend or a buzzword.
Yeah.
And we have invested previously, and we continue investing. The partnership with Microsoft that we have now announced in April is a sign of this. It's a capital-intensive business, absolutely. Today, the company has a very strong balance sheet with a very limited amount of debt.
Yeah.
We don't have debt, actually. So we do have the capability through proper leveraging of the balance sheet to ensure at the same time the development in our data center and the payment of the dividend in line with the dividend policy of the company.
So I guess reading between the lines, it is fair to expect some bond issuance given your leverage ratios.
Not necessarily a bond issuance, but raising debt if needed for projects that create value for the company and its shareholders is something that we can envisage in the future when it is necessary.
Yeah. More broadly, I mean, I know we've spoken a lot about the capital market
Yes.
side of this and the opportunities that this share sale opens up. Let me just ask you about what broader growth opportunities you see once this is behind you.
We regularly look at growth opportunity organic within the business. Data center is one of them. Financial services is another one. So we look at development areas outside our core business in a very disciplined way, in areas that make sense for us and create value for the shareholders. From an M&A perspective, it is true that we operate within the UAE. So in the core business, we look only at the UAE. Outside the core, we reserve the possibility to look at opportunities outside the UAE, but that has a UAE angle. And we evaluate regularly the possibilities in the M&A space. If there is something that makes sense, definitely we'll proceed with it.
Yeah, really great to have you on. Thank you so much for talking us through the share sale offering, and it closes September 12th, I believe, the end of this week. Yeah. Kais Ben Hamida, CFO of Do. And coming up, Ivory Coast bars two of its biggest opposition leaders, clearing the way for President Alassane Ouattara to seek a fourth term. Details after the break. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. Well, Ivory Coast has barred some of its biggest opposition figures from running in next month's presidential elections. Former Credit Suisse boss Tidjane Thiam and ex-President Laurent Gbagbo have now been officially disqualified, leaving President Alassane Ouattara with a clear path to re-election. For more, Bloomberg's Andira Ganga joins us now from Kigali, Rwanda. Well, these were heavyweight challengers. Tidjane Thiam sat down with correspondent Michel Hussein over the weekend, an extensive interview talking about how he had been sidelined into these presidential elections. I recommend to all viewers to go and read that. But essentially, is this turning the vote into a one-man race for the incumbent?
Absolutely, Jumana. That's exactly what it has done. It has put Alassane Ouattara at the front, back and center of this race, and he's going to win early in the morning, clear victory. And this is because the Electoral Commission skimmed down the list of presidential candidates from 60 to about 5. And some of the key names missing from that, as you mentioned in the intro, Laurent Gbagbo, former leader of the country. And he was excluded on grounds of criminal conviction, even though he was acquitted at the International Criminal Court on crimes against humanity. He was the president in 2010. He refused to accept elections from the results from the national elections, and this led to a civil war that left 3,000 people dead. And despite this, he still commands sizable support, and he was going to pose some sort of challenge to President Alassane Ouattara. The other candidate that has been excluded, which is very interesting, is Tidjane Thiam, the new kid on the block, 63 years old. He has experience in global finance, and he didn't bring any political baggage into the presidential election. He was the leader of the largest opposition political party in Ivory Coast, and he was gaining quite some momentum. His message was simple. Good schools, affordable health care, good roads, and functional systems all start at the ballot box. And this was a message that was resonating with a lot of people in Ivory Coast. He was excluded on grounds of nationality. He holds French passport, and he says that some of these rules were adopted from France when the country got independence, and they do not resonate and make sense in the context of Ivory Coast. But he said he doesn't do regrets. And what he says is that this is just a coronation of President Alassane Ouattara. And it really is, because it sets him up for a fourth term. It will extend his 14-year rule. And he says that because they had a new constitution, it has reset the number of times that he can vie for presidency. Even though he's going to win, this is an election you're going to be following closely because stakes are high. The economy is quite resilient. It has shown resilient trajectory. But for the people, they will be watching out.
Yeah, most definitely. And viewers of this show will remember Tidjane Thiam as a big heavyweight also in the financial industry space, former CEO of Credit Suisse. Bloomberg's Ndiruganga in Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to mark a birthday today, not of a person, but of a metro. Today marks 16 years since Dubai Metro first launched. The fully automated, driverless public transport system carried more than 275 million passengers last year. Now, the Roads and Transport Authority has begun expansion work into the northern suburbs of Dubai, set to be completed by 2029. So that's one for our Dubai viewers. Good news with the Dubai Metro expansion on its 16th birthday. Okay, a quick look at equity futures. Things are leaning up. S&P futures up 12 basis points, very close to all-time highs once again. European markets a little weaker as we continue to monitor developments out of France. The pressure is on Macron now to find a new prime minister. So more for the European shows. That's it for our show, however. Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.